It's hard to even think back to when everything started to fall apart, but I guess the signs were there all along. It wasn't some dramatic moment or an obvious red flag that made me suspicious, more like a creeping feeling I couldn't shake. My wife, Karen, had always been a bit of a party girl, but it wasn't until recently that I began noticing how much she seemed to distance herself from me. At first, I chalked it up to her work stress, or maybe a midlife crisis. But something felt off. We'd been married for 8 years, and for the most part, things had been good. Sure, there were some minor arguments, like any couple, but nothing that screamed, "This marriage is over." Or at least that's what I thought. There were little things. She started going out more with her friends, acting distant, texting on her phone in a way that made me raise an eyebrow. I'd ask her what she was doing, and she'd brush it off with some vague excuse like, just talking to the girls or work stuff. But it didn't sit right with me. I'd catch her glancing at her phone, quickly hiding it whenever I walked by. When I asked who she was texting, she'd just snap back, "It's nothing. Why do you care so much?" I tried to push it aside. Maybe I was overthinking things. But then, New Year's Eve came and everything changed. The night started out like any other New Year's party, full of laughter, music, and the usual crowd of friends and acquaintances. Karen was her usual self, dancing, laughing, looking stunning in that red dress she knew I liked. But there was something different about the way she was behaving. She was a little too animated, a little too eager to be around a particular guy, Brad, one of my old college buddies. At first, I didn't think much of it. Brad was a good guy, and I figured maybe Karen just enjoyed the company. But as the night went on, I noticed the way she was constantly laughing a little too hard at his jokes, touching his arm more than I thought was necessary. I told myself it was just the festive atmosphere, the champagne, the good vibes of the night. But then, something happened that made my stomach drop. I was standing by the food table, talking to a few friends when I saw Karen and Brad whispering together, their faces close. I could hear her giggling, her hand resting on his shoulder. And then he slipped her a note, a folded piece of paper so casual like it was no big deal. I don't know what came over me, but I immediately felt this wave of heat rush over me. Without thinking, I marched straight to them, my heart pounding in my chest. Brad looked up, startled, but Karen just smiled, that fake, charming smile she always had ready for situations like this. I grabbed the note from Brad's hand, unfurling it quickly, my eyes scanning the words. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a message from him. Flirty, suggestive, and full of plans to meet up later. The words made my blood boil. My hands were shaking as I looked up at Karen, who was standing there, completely unfazed. Brad was watching, his face a mix of guilt and surprise. I couldn't keep quiet. "What the hell is this, Karen?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. She just shrugged, looking at me like I was overreacting. I stood there, the note still in my hand, my eyes locked on Karen. I could feel my chest tightening, my heart hammering in my ears. The noise of the party faded into the background, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own thoughts, each one more furious than the last. She didn't look sorry, not even a little. "Karen, what the hell is this?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. "Are you seriously cheating on me with Brad? Right here? Right now?" She looked at me like I was the one who was being ridiculous. Her expression was calm, almost dismissive, as if I was the crazy one for even questioning her. "It's not what you think, Jake," she said, rolling her eyes, her tone condescending. "It's just a joke. Brad and I were just having fun. It's harmless." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was reeling, trying to piece together the last few months of weird behavior, the lies, the late nights, the secretive phone calls. All of it was falling into place, but it felt like my entire world was crashing down around me. "Harmless?" I asked, the sarcasm dripping from my words. "You call this harmless? You've been sneaking around behind my back, and you're telling me it's harmless? How long has this been going on, Karen?" She let out a frustrated sigh, looking away like I was annoying her. "I don't know, Jake. I don't owe you an explanation. You wouldn't understand anyway." It's not like I'm asking you to stay home and cry about it. Brad stood there awkwardly, clearly not sure what to do, but Karen didn't seem to care. She kept talking like nothing was wrong. Honestly, Jake, you're so controlling sometimes. It's just a little fun. I don't know why you're making this such a big deal. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose it. Instead, I took a deep breath, glaring at her. You know what, Karen? You're right. I don't need to be here, dealing with your bullshit. I'll handle this in my own way. She looked at me, her eyes cold and indifferent. Good. Go cry about it. I'm done with this conversation. I stormed off, the rage in my chest threatening to explode. She didn't even try to stop me. It was like she didn't care at all. I walked out of the room, my thoughts racing. My mind couldn't process what had just happened. Was this really my life now? Was Karen, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, really capable of this kind of betrayal? I felt like I was suffocating, my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped into the cold night air. I needed space, time to think. I found a quiet corner by the back door of the house, trying to steady my breathing. Everything felt wrong. The party, the people, everything. My mind kept replaying that moment over and over again. The sight of her, laughing with Brad, passing notes like it was some kind of secret game. The anger was still there, bubbling just below the surface, but it was quickly followed by a deep sense of sadness, of loss. How long had this been going on? How long had she been lying to me? I thought back to all the little things I'd ignored, the late nights she spent working, the way she suddenly became so secretive with her phone, the way she started distancing herself. I felt like such a fool for not seeing it sooner. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the ground, my mind spinning, my stomach twisted in knots. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, had thrown everything away for what? A little thrill? A game? How could she have done this to me? And then there was the overwhelming feeling of humiliation. Everyone at that party had seen it, had witnessed my wife disrespecting me in front of God knows how many people. They must have all been whispering about it. I couldn't even bring myself to go back inside. I stayed there in the cold for what felt like hours. My thoughts were like a whirlwind, 1 minute filled with rage, the next with overwhelming sadness. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Why did she do this to me? The next few days felt like a blur. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. I kept going over that moment in my head, replaying the confrontation over and over again. But what really stuck with me was how easily Karen dismissed everything. The casual way she shrugged it off, like I was the one who was being unreasonable. It made my blood boil every time I thought about it. I spent hours sitting in the living room, scrolling through her texts, trying to piece things together. What hurt more than anything was how much she lied to me. She told me it was nothing, just a joke, but the evidence was right there. Texts, messages, even plans to meet up. How could she do this to me? I had to make a decision I never thought I'd have to make. I loved Karen. I'd spent the better part of my life with her, building a future together. But now, everything felt like a lie. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? Or was it time to cut my losses and walk away? I needed answers. I needed to confront her again, not just for closure, but to see if she'd even be honest this time. I wasn't going to let her twist the truth anymore. When I finally sat down with her, she acted like nothing was wrong. She was cold, distant, like I was just another inconvenience. Jake, why are we still talking about this? I've already told you it's nothing. Nothing? I snapped. You call that nothing? Do you think I'm stupid? I saw everything. The note, the texts. You've been lying to me, Karen. And don't pretend like it's not a big deal. You've been sneaking around behind my back. She rolled her eyes, clearly getting irritated. I already told you it was just a joke, a little harmless fun. I didn't think you'd get all upset over nothing. Nothing. That word again felt like a slap in the face. I stood up, taking a deep breath. You know what? I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living like this, pretending that everything's fine. You've made your choice, Karen. And so have I. I walked out of the room, the weight of the decision heavy on my chest. It was over. There was no coming back from this. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay with someone who disrespected me like this. The moment I walked out of that room, I knew my marriage was over. But what Karen didn't realize was that her betrayal wasn't just going to slip away quietly. I didn't want revenge just for the sake of it, but I needed to do something to make her understand the magnitude of what she'd done. She had hurt me, humiliated me, and now I had to make her feel it. I took a few days to think things through. I couldn't just leave it like this, not without some kind of payback. I wasn't going to stoop to her level, but I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions. So, I started thinking about the most fitting way to get back at her. It was then that I remembered something. Karen was obsessed with her reputation. She cared about how people saw her. So, I figured the best way to hit her where it hurt was in front of all her friends. The ones who had seen her laughing and flirting with Brad at the party, the ones who had stood by watching while she treated me like dirt. I invited a few close friends to my place for a gathering a week later, and Karen, as expected, was all too happy to come over. She had no idea what was about to happen. When she walked into the room, I greeted her with a smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I was calm, collected, almost too calm. I had spent hours preparing, and I wasn't going to let her see me sweat. As she took a seat, I stood up, looking around at the small group of friends we'd once shared. I think it's time we all had a little chat. I began, my voice steady. About something that's been going on for a while now. Something that I've recently discovered. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me, confused. Karen's face immediately hardened, her eyes narrowing as she sensed where this was going. But it was too late for her to stop it now. I pulled out my phone and showed them the note, the one she had passed to Brad that night. Then I read the text messages aloud. The flirtations, the plans to meet up, the lies she had told me for months. The room was completely still as I laid it all out for them. Karen's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form some sort of defense. But no words came. "Jake, don't," she finally muttered, her voice shaky, but I wasn't done yet. "You don't get to lie your way out of this, Karen," I said, my voice low but clear. "You've been messing around with Brad behind my back, and now everyone knows. I just thought it was only fair to let your friends in on your little secret." The silence in the room was deafening. Karen stood up, her face flushed with anger, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She was losing control, and it felt good to watch. "Jake, you're an asshole," she spat. "You're really going to do this? You're really going to embarrass me like this?" I shrugged, my expression cold. "You did it to yourself. If you wanted to keep your secrets, maybe you shouldn't have been so careless. Don't get mad at me for exposing the truth." With that, Karen stormed out of the room, her heels clicking angrily as she left. I didn't care. The damage had been done, and I had finally made her understand the weight of her betrayal. The look on her face, the shock and humiliation. Nothing would ever erase that moment. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Karen didn't try to contact me for the first few days after the confrontation. I didn't hear from her, and frankly, I didn't care. I had exposed the truth, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a grip on the situation. But as the dust settled, the emotional weight of everything began to sink in. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt anymore. It was the realization that I had wasted so much time in a relationship where I wasn't truly valued. Karen had lied to me for months, maybe even longer. I thought we had something real. I thought we had a future together. But I had been living in a fantasy. All those years, all those quiet doubts I ignored, they were nothing compared to the hurt I felt now. I couldn't help but replay everything. The way she acted like it was no big deal, like I was just some fool. The way she had so easily dismissed our marriage for a fling with Brad. I tried to keep my anger under control, but I couldn't help but think about how she had manipulated me, how she had treated me with such little respect. Part of me, though, still missed her. It was hard to let go of someone you had shared so much with. The memories, the good times, they lingered in my mind like ghosts, making everything feel even worse. But I reminded myself that none of it had been real. If it was, she wouldn't have done what she did. She wouldn't have thrown everything away so easily. The hardest part, though, was when I saw her again, just a few days later. She showed up at my door, her face full of anger and defiance. She wasn't there to apologize. She wasn't there to explain. No, she was there to accuse me of ruining her life. "You've made me look like a joke," she shouted, pacing in front of me. "You had no right to humiliate me like that. I never did anything wrong. I wasn't cheating, I was just having fun. Why can't you just let it go?" Her words felt like a slap in the face. She had no remorse, no understanding of what she had done. She was still trying to shift the blame onto me, trying to paint herself as the victim. I stood there, numb to her anger, and just listened as she ranted. "You're the one who messed up, Karen," I said, finally finding my voice. "You're the one who threw away everything we had for a few laughs with Brad. So if you think I'm going to sit here and feel sorry for you, you've got another thing coming." Her eyes flickered with something. Maybe regret, maybe anger, but it was fleeting. She shook her head, her lips curling into a sneer. "You'll regret this, Jake," she spat before turning to leave, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, she was gone. I didn't chase after her. I didn't need to. The moment she left, I felt this weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't relief exactly, but it was a step toward healing. I was finally free of her toxic presence, free of the lies she had wrapped me up in. The days after Karen's outburst were quiet. It was like the storm had passed, and now I was left with the calm aftermath. I spent time sorting through my emotions: anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. But, surprisingly, there was also something else: relief. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like I was living someone else's life. The more space I put between myself and Karen, the clearer things became. I didn't need her. I didn't need the lies. I needed to take control of my life again, and that meant letting go of the past. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Hanging out with friends, picking up old hobbies, focusing on myself. It wasn't easy. There were moments where the pain of the betrayal still stung, but each day was a step toward moving on. Karen, on the other hand, kept trying to reach out. She sent me texts, called, even showed up at my place. But each time I ignored her. I knew I was better off without her. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about moving forward, about finding peace. In the end, I learned a lot from this experience. First, I learned that trust is something that can be shattered in an instant, and once it's gone, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Karen's actions made me realize that no matter how much you love someone, if they don't respect you, it's not worth fighting for. I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. In the past, I would have begged for answers or tried to fix things. But this time, I chose to stand up for myself. I chose to walk away, to make my life better without her in it. Looking back, I don't regret the confrontation. I don't regret exposing her lies. She needed to understand that actions have consequences, and I wasn't going to let her get away with treating me like a fool. I wasn't going to let her continue to disrespect me. To anyone reading this who's in a similar situation, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let anyone, no matter how much you love them, make you feel worthless. You deserve better. And as for Karen, well, I haven't heard from her in a while. I don't know what happened to her or if she ever came to terms with what she did, but I don't really care anymore. I've moved on. I'm better off without her. And that's something I'll never forget.